Good morning and welcome to our second podcast of the season and our last one for the year, I suppose. Today joining us is Becky Carroll, who is an Associate Extension Specialist for Fruits and Nuts here at OSU. Yep. It's the holiday season. We all have fruitcakes, and thank you, Becky, for this knowing those
fruity
things.
And nutty, so
but also very sweet too. So, thank you for joining us today,
Sure.
Becky.
It's nice to be here.
This is your first podcast you've
It's
done
my
with
first
us?
podcast ever.
Oh,
so,
ever.
Yes.
Well, welcome. We're the premium one right here. So glad you could join us. And you ready to get started?
Sure.
All right. Well, so this time of year is kind of slower with gardening and that sort of stuff. And I know I enjoy kind of the break a little bit from having to get everything done in the garden and be able to enjoy the holidays.
Right.
You've had a busy season this year a little bit.
Yeah, it's always seems like it's a busy season, and it really doesn't slow down too much if you're doing pecans or and some of the other fruit crops as well.
Right, because is pecan harvest done, or is it still going on?
It's still going on for a lot of our native growers.
Okay. And
most of our improved growers have harvested early and got those in for the holiday market. Their objective is, to collect all of them and get them to market before Thanksgiving and Christmas and the end of the year. Because that's when a lot of people think about buying pecans.
How long does that process take? Because it's not just a matter of harvesting. They have to dry them and that sort of stuff.
Especially with early season harvest, the early ripening varieties, they want to get the premium price, so they want to harvest early. And so the shucks on the pecans are still green, and so they have a lot of moisture in them. So when they shake those trees and they drop to the ground, they're still really high in moisture content. So after they harvest them, they go ahead and they put them in dryers a lot of the time. They'll run through a pre-cleaner in the field a lot of the time too, and that will remove some of those light pecans or the ones that are stuck in the shucks, and they'll come out. Some of them will come out in the field, but then they take the other ones back to the shop, and they'll put those in drying bins or in trailers with fans and things that will actually dry the nuts down to get to the right moisture content. And that's usually they want them about 4.5 to 5.5% moisture.
And does that affect the flavor or the
it really
shelf
can.
life of them?
Yeah, it affects a lot of the quality of that nut. And so if you get a really green pecan, you might have seen them. Sometimes you'll crack them and they're almost like rubbery.
Oh, yeah.
And those are just really high in moisture, and they don't taste very good. They taste green.
Okay.
But if they can put them out, if you collect them at home, you can lay them out on a screen or put them in a mesh sack, put a fan on them, let them hang out for a week or so to get that moisture content down. And whenever it's ready to go, if you take that kernel and you break it, it snaps. Yeah, you can actually hear the snap. And so that's a good indication of when it's dry enough. And so it makes a big difference for our large growers too, because if they take them to sell when they're too high in moisture, those buyers will dock their prices because they're selling moisture. And the longer those buyers have them, the weight goes down because the moisture is evaporating. But you don't want them too dry either, because once you shell them, they can shatter more easily.
So that's something the growers have to do before they actually sell it. They're responsible for the drying process.
They can be. There's all different ways to sell the products, but some people will take them, have them cleaned, and then the cleaners will go ahead and dry them down. But it's good for a lot of people to get that drying process started right after they get them harvested, because they can mold, and if they start to mold, the whole load can be bad. Yeah.
So are they harvesting early while it's still at a higher moisture content?
Yeah. In
order to beat the squirrels and things, or
yes, exactly.
Birds.
Crows were really bad this year.
Yeah.
And so a crow, one squirrel can take about 1 pound of nuts a day. And there's never one crow,
right?
It's usually the whole tree is covered with crows, And so you just think about how much pecans cost when you're buying them yourself, how much is actually being removed from that tree in just a couple of days, even.
So do they actually know which ones are at the right harvest weight and stuff. The birds know. So.
They know what's ripe, and so if you watch an orchard that has different varieties, those crows will go to those trees that are opening up and are getting at that stage where they want them.
Okay.
And then you can start seeing them fly away, and then find pecans on the ground that have holes in them.
I was going to say, so they don't. Birds aren't picky. They don't care about the ones that might have worms in them and that sort of stuff,
it's
right?
just extra protein,
yeah.
right?
So they might be eating some bad ones if you haven't sprayed your pecan tree and stuff.
Might have some weevil in those. So.
Okay, all right. Well, I heard there was some issues. Oh, yeah, we should give a shout out to Brian Jervis.
Hey, Brian.
He likes your cup, he said.
Oh, yeah. My son and daughter-in-law got it for me.
Oh, very nice. And hello, Pam. That's my aunt, actually.
Okay.
Hi, Pam.
Hi, Pam.
So we wanted to mention, too, about the pecan growers. Did they have some issues this year with, was harvest good? Or with all the rain that they suffered
There's
from?
been some issues starting at the beginning of the last spring with so much rainfall. And it never really stopped until there was a short kind of a flash drought in the middle of the year, and that affected some people, but a lot of our growers were underwater for weeks and weeks at a time.
Because for people who might not know, pecans often are grown in kind of river bottom areas. They like moisture,
but they don't like to stand in water. Yeah.
They were flooded, right? 6 feet under for months.
Some of the trees that I've seen pictures of in the northeastern part of the state were underwater, totally. Big mature native trees were completely underwater. And so a lot of those lost all their leaves that were underwater. And if there was anything above that water line, they kept those leaves. And even a few of those trees had a few nuts on them, which is pretty crazy. If they're in areas along rivers where the water's moving, it's not as detrimental as if it's kind of backed up into that orchard where the water's more stagnant.
Okay.
So if the water's moving, it provides some oxygen to the roots.
Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, in those areas where the water just backed up and stayed, it's really hard on those trees because those roots are lacking oxygen and they start dying back. And so that tree is going to be more stressed by any type of drought conditions later, maybe even next year. We may have some issues with some of those trees having root problems.
Oh, okay. So did it reduce some of the harvest this year?
Yeah, it did. There are some areas that people they weren't able to get in to harvest because they were still wet. Oh. And then because of so much moisture, we probably had 20 inches more than normal in some areas. And it was just a continuous, every week or so we'd get a heavy rainfall. Yeah. And so they weren't able to get out and apply the fungicides or the insecticides that they needed to. And I know a lot of my growers up in the northeastern part of the state have some scab issues, pecan scab. And so that affects the shuck of the pecan at certain stages, but it can also affect leaves early on. That scab likes to infect what's actively growing. And so if it happens during shuck and the sizing of those nuts, then it affects the quality of the nut, the size of the nut. If it's too bad, they'll just drop to the ground really early. Okay. Pecans are really good about taking care of themselves.
Like aborting the stuff if it's...
Yeah, they will just abort the crop. If they're under stress, a lot of the time they will just drop nuts. Okay. And so you'll see, I had lots of calls all through the season. My tree has nuts underneath it. And it's like, yeah, it's due to some type of stress. And unless I'm there to see what it is, sometimes it's hard to identify what it is.
Right.
But it can be insect feeding. It can be too much water, not enough water. It can be... Which
is kind of opposite of what we think of a lot of times with plants. You know, a lot of times just in a garden situation, ornamental, people will say that my flowers aren't blooming, my shrub's not blooming, and we say stress it.
Right.
Because a plant's whole intention is for survival and to reproduce, make that flower, make that seed.
Right.
And so here, in this case, stress doesn't help it necessarily.
No, it really doesn't. And this year we also had a huge crop. And so when we were looking at the cluster counts from around the state, we were 100% of those terminals had had fruit on them at a lot of the early season.
Okay.
And so that's stressful for the tree as well.
Okay.
And so that's why we have pecans that alternate bear. They have a big crop one year and then very little the next.
Right.
And so this year should have been our on year, a great big crop. And on our native trees, there's really not a lot we can do about that except keep them happy with fertilizer and do those, disease insect control that we can. But keeping fertilization proper is the way to keep them happiest and producing better. But on improved varieties, we can remove some of that crop during August when those nuts are in the water stage. And if we remove some of that crop, then we'll have a more even production from year to year.
Oh, okay.
And so it's not stressing the tree as much. The flowers for next year is happening at that August time frame. The buds are differentiating at that time. And so if we have a big crop that they're trying to size all those nuts, they don't have any energy to put in for next year's crop.
Gotcha.
And so we've done a lot of research to find out the best time to take off that crop. And
well, it's kind of like thinning your peach tree,
exactly,
right? In the springtime.
And we had a grower, Mr. Couch, who lived at Luther. He said, we thin peaches and apples and pears. Why don't we thin pecan trees?
Right, it only makes sense.
Right, and so we started doing research there at his place in Luther, and I spent many, many days and hours, and it seemed like, forever, up in a bucket truck, tagging individual terminal branches and then going back to look at what flowered the next year, what cropped the next year, and looking at different times to remove nuts. So it was a lot of research into that.
Oh,
and it works great.
So it actually has been researched and proven.
Yeah,
that,
and it's used all over the world now.
Oh, fantastic!
So that's pretty neat.
Well, we are one of the biggest pecan producers in the country. Is that how do we compare with Georgia?
Well, Georgia's got us beat.
Okay,
but Georgia's are all improved varieties. Okay. They're all planted. We can brag that a lot of our production is native, and so. We probably have 80% of our crop is native production. Oh, okay. So if we look at the native pecan belt, it starts way up north, but they're not productive trees. But you have pecans that are native way up into like Wisconsin, up in that area, and it comes down through Kansas and Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and then down into Mexico. And in native pecan production, we're usually second. Texas has us beat just because their size. They're so much bigger.
Okay.
But this year they didn't have a very good crop, so we may be a little closer to them this year. So we'll see.
So do you think our pecan prices are up this year because of?
No, unfortunately, our pecan prices. They haven't been as high as a lot of the growers want them to be. And so that's kind of confusing for a lot of people. And so we're trying to figure out exactly why they're buying from, some of the big buyers are buying from cold storage, other areas. And so our prices aren't great. So
go support your local native pecan farmers.
Exactly, and we have a lot of nut houses across the state, and they have the freshest pecans. The growers are harvesting their crop, they're processing them and selling them to the public, and that's where you're going to get the best quality.
Yeah,
and so
a lot of them sell treats made of those pecans too. So if you're not much of a baker, you can go get turtles and get stocking stuffer type stuff there. Yeah,
I always buy a lot of cinnamon, spiced pecans or chocolate covered pecans for gifts from some of the growers around the state.
And some sell them shelled, some sell them cracked, some sell whole. I think
some people like to have that fun of cracking their own pecan.
Oh, yeah.
It's something to do in the evening.
Yeah.
Personally, I've done plenty of that with research projects. I don't enjoy just sitting and cracking pecans, but I like it when I
eat more than I get left in the bowl.
Exactly. And so I like it when I can get them cracked and blown, shelled and blown. So all you get is just a few shells you can pick out.
Yeah,
so. And we have a lot of people that will do that around the state as well.
Well, I grew up next to the Knight Pecan Farm out south of Sepulpa.
Hey.
So I know if they're listening, the Knights, and I know you've had some field days out there. So they used to have a little store out on the farm that we would always stop at and get our pecans every year.
They have one in Tulsa.
And near, right there behind the Tulsa West shopping district.
Yeah, and then I think they also have some at the Mother Road Market and some places.
Okay.
But there's a lot of our growers that do put some of their product in other places for sale in some of our stores around the
make
area.
it a little more convenient.
Yeah, I found some Hoffman pecans at Food Pyramid this past week.
That's fantastic.
And so it's
kudos to those stores for supporting that as well.
Those locally grown pecans are fresh.
And pecans have a pretty good freezer life. Is that correct?
Right. They need to be stored. You can store them in shell or when they're cracked. But at room temperature, they're only going to last about 3 months before those oils start to go rancid. And so in the refrigerator, they'll last about a year. In the deep freeze, if they're stored properly, good freezer bags or freezer containers, they can last for years and years. Just take out what you need, put them back in the freezer, and then you don't have to worry about them going bad. And so it's really important to keep them properly stored.
Okay. So keep them in your deep freeze if you're going to use them for a long time.
In the grocery store, that's not where they sell them. Yeah. And so we're trying to work with doing some research to show them the importance of shelf life, and hopefully we can get some of them to start storing them in freezers as well.
And pecans aren't necessarily like rancid peanuts. A rancid peanut, is right, or is it got that
it
strong
does
of
have
a taste?
A bad taste, especially to people who eat a lot, like myself. I won't. If it's brown, and they're supposed to be light golden when they're fresh.
Right. No, they have.
And so once you toast them or something, they take on a dark color. But if it's not toasted, it can be really off.
Okay.
Bitter and just not a good taste.
Okay. I could put pecans in anything.
Oh yeah,
salads, desserts, whatever.
And that's what we want to see is people using them through the year, not just at holiday time.
Right.
And so if they go to americanpecans.com, there is a ton of really great recipes. It's through the American Pecan Council, and they have beautiful recipes for dips and soups and salads and main dishes, all different kinds of things. So use americanpecans.com.
Okay. So if anybody's looking for a last minute recipe idea to take to their holidays or something,
that's great.
We've got a lot of potlucks coming up this time of year. So want to give a shout out to Thera. Is that how I say your name, hopefully? Thera O'Brien.
Hello.
She enjoys hearing everything that we're talking about today. Thank you for
if y'all have any questions,
joining us. They can comment. As a reminder, you can comment on Facebook if you have any particular questions that you want to ask about. We'll also want to say hi to Carla.
That's my mama.
Is that your mama? We got all our family listening today, so thank you for joining us.
She's my biggest fan.
Very good. Well, so I want to follow up a little bit because we talk more. We're gonna follow this pecan track a little bit longer. A lot of times, homeowners just have one pecan tree in their backyard.
Right.
So we've talked more about the grower side of things, and of course they can spray and do different stuff. What does the homeowner who has one pecan tree in their backyard need to think about and do? How do they get a pecan harvest?
Well, it's not as easy. Yeah. And we do have fact sheet on managing pecans in a home landscape.
Okay.
And it has some tips for how to control some of those pests. There's nothing that you really can spray very easily on a mature pecan tree. So for like weevil.
Well, and they're so big too, to actually have the mechanical equipment to get the spray up there.
And a lot of the pest control companies, they won't spray a food crop. Now, they'll spray your ornamental trees, but if it's a food crop, it has different requirements.
Right.
So it's a little bit harder. And so things like sanitation is very important. So if your tree has problems with scab one season and they're dropping nuts or leaves, collect all of those and just discard them. Don't just leave them, because good sanitation goes a long way with all of our fruit and pecan crops. If you leave that inoculum out there, then it can just reinfect continuously.
Okay.
But because we are a pecan state, a native state, we have a lot of disease and insects that are just naturally occurring here.
Right.
And so they have kind of adapted to the way our pecan trees grow and everything. So we see some of those issues every year. So for pecan weevil, which is the biggie for a lot of our home growers.
And that's what puts the little hole
yes.
in the shell. Yeah.
The weevil, it comes out of the ground and it climbs up the first dark upright object, which is usually the tree trunk, and it will climb up the tree. About 85% climb the trunk, and maybe 10 or 15 fly to the canopy or they go somewhere else.
Okay.
And so what our commercial growers use is it's called a circle trap, and it circles the trunk of the tree, and it kind of has a boll weevil trap top on it.
Okay.
Has to go the entire diameter of that trunk, though. You can add extra screening or more than one trunk. But when those weevil come out of the ground, they crawl up the trunk, and then they're captured in those little trap tops.
Oh, okay.
And so that indicates to our commercial growers they're moving, so it's time to go ahead and spray.
Okay.
And this usually happens, we like traps at the end of July and keep them out until harvest time. So if a homeowner just has one tree, they can put a trap or two on their tree and then just collect them and destroy those weevil. You may have to check that trap every couple of years if you have one of those trees that has weevil
So you're
all the time.
mechanically just preventing the vast majority of them from climbing your tree that way. Okay.
And so you can reduce the number. You may not ever get rid of them,
Right.
but you can reduce the number that are getting to the nuts by just catching them in those traps.
Okay, so pecan weevil traps, is that
It's
what it
called
would
a
be
circle
called?
trap.
A circle trap.
And there are a couple of places that you can order them from.
Okay.
And there's a fact sheet through Entomology and Plant Pathology that also has directions on how to build them yourself.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, but
We might have to have you on the show to show us how to build one.
Well, okay.
Or
We might get
somebody.
Dr. Mulder.
Okay,
maybe.
Dr. Mulder,
Yeah.
maybe.
But yeah, we use those. Really, it's very helpful to know when to spray, but also for just decreasing the amount of pecan weevil.
Okay.
Because once they get up into the tree, they can lay eggs in many nuts over
And
the
that's
short
putting
life.
the hole that...
No, this is
No?
not the hole that you see.
Okay. That's what the exit hole, isn't it?
Right. The weevil has a very long, they call it a proboscis, and it looks like it would be a straw. Looks like it would suck up things, but actually at the end of that long proboscis, it has chewing mouth parts.
Oh, okay.
And so a pecan weevil's pretty big. And so it goes up into the tree, and it finds the nut. They kind of test them because when they're at the water stage, if
You're talking about the nut as a water stage.
Stage, when they're still filling out and making kernel, if they tried to lay eggs in there, they wouldn't be viable.
Oh.
And so at that point, they just feed on it or they test them, and those nuts drop to the ground. So if you see a lot of nuts under your tree that are pretty good size green shucks, in that August time frame, it's probably because you have pecan weevil or stink bug or something that's feeding on those nuts, so they drop off.
Okay.
Now, once they go into the dough stage and the water turns to dough, the end of August and later through the season, then they walk in a circle and they just like chew a hole. They make a little tracks. You can actually see the tracks where they've walked and gotten a grip to
on
like dig
kernel
on the shuck.
Okay,
on the shuck,
yeah.
on the green shuck. You can see little footprints.
Okay.
And where they've chewed their way around. Yeah, she just chews a circle through that shell, turns around, lays the eggs in it, and she lays 2 to 4 eggs in each one of those nuts. So each one of those eggs can develop into the little larva.
Okay.
And so the hole you actually see is after that larva has completed its life cycle,
comes out.
it chews a perfectly circular hole. I saw one of my friends and pecan growers, Mike Spradling, posted a picture on his Facebook this morning of a weevil larva trying to squeeze out of that hole, and they start the process all over. They drop to the ground, go down in the soil, 18
So they
inches.
overwinter in the ground.
And they stay
Okay.
maybe up to 3 years in the ground.
Oh, okay.
Because remember, our pecan crop is usually big and then little.
So they've
adapted to that as well. And so it's pretty amazing. It's pretty aggravating to a lot of people.
Aren't they clever?
Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, can I spray the ground? and get them,
yeah.
Down in the ground. Well, you don't want to put enough chemical on the soil surface that it's going to go down 18 inches into the ground.
They're too far.
They're too far, and they're also protected in a little cocoon. And so not much is going to affect them. And so once we get through those processes and they start to come back out of the ground in 2 to 3 years, we'll get a heavy rainfall, we irrigate, then they come back out and they start all over.
Are they like pupating down in the ground and then they come out as an adult?
They come out as an adult.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But if you have a tree that has weevil really bad and you don't do anything about it, that cycle is never broken.
Okay.
And so you just continually get more weevil. Population just grows and grows. So those traps can reduce that a little bit.
So for homeowners who might be just have 1 or 2 trees, look at getting a circle trap or building a circle trap and mechanically keeping the weevils off your tree. That makes sense.
And so
and sanitation, cleaning up anything, debris.
Right. And I've heard, if you have guinea hens or something, they love those little larvae as they drop out of the nuts. So if they're out there picking them up,
Okay, that makes
works
sense.
too.
And another insect that we often see in the fall is the twig girdler, especially on pecan trees. And that's when you have branches that are falling to pick those up.
Right.
Because, again, that can repeat that life cycle if you don't remove those.
Right.
And they chew off the ends of your branches, which is where your harvest
fruit is.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And so for commercial growers, we don't really usually have them spray for those.
Okay.
But they're spraying for other insects, so it may control those.
Okay.
For homeowners, the best thing is sanitation. Pick them up. Don't just put them in your compost or, chip them up or anything. You want to go ahead and burn them or send them off somewhere else because the eggs are actually in that branch that falls to the ground.
Okay, yeah.
The adult is laying the eggs in the end of that shoot, and then the eggs and the larvae develop in dead wood.
Right.
And so they chew off that edge, and when we get a wind...
insects are very smart.
They are.
It's amazing how they figured. Yeah.
And because we have, such great winds in Oklahoma, they know that they don't chew it completely off, but they chew it all the way around, and it looks like someone has taken a saw and cut it.
Yeah.
But with our winds, breaks off, falls to the ground, and that's where they overwinter and they start their life cycle all over again.
Yeah, it literally looks like somebody's ran twigs through a pencil sharpener or something like that. So,
it's pretty neat. I always do a lot of master gardener trainings in the fall, and I'll take some of those just to show them how that looks.
How precise the ends and uniform they look too. Well, that's all great information because I know so many people in neighborhoods just have one tree. And
one thing I would mention,
my mom has one in her backyard actually.
Now, if they're thinking about planting a tree in their backyard, they probably should look at something that is disease resistant.
Okay, so one of the improved varieties?
One of the improved varieties, something like Kansas or Lakota, they don't get pecan scab. And so that would be, beneficial because on some of these years that we've had the last few years with a lot of rainfall, we've seen a lot of scab even in our home landscapes.
Okay.
And so planting resistant varieties is the best way to, not have to worry about some of that.
Yeah.
And so, but if you have one pecan tree, if you plant a Kansas, you'll have to plant a complementary variety that pollinates unless you have a neighbor that has another pecan tree.
Okay.
Or if you live around native pecan trees, they're all different, so they'll probably complete that pollination for you.
Okay. Important to know.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned pecan. We've talked about pecan scab.
Yeah, I kind of get all up on pecans here.
I just want to let people know out there, if they're listening, that if you're not familiar, Mesonet has a pecan scab advisory. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's really pretty interesting. They've got a place that growers can log on. They click on the Mesonet station that's closest to them, and they put in the type of susceptibility for the varieties that they're growing. So if they have native production only, they're going to be the most resistant to pecan scab. So they need about 30 hours of the right conditions, the right temperature and humidity level for that scab to develop. So 30 hours of those right conditions, which is about 90 degrees and pretty high humidity. Okay. And so once that criteria is met on that Mesonet station through the logging all the temperature and humidity, then it says you need to go ahead and spray your trees.
Okay.
If you have a very sensitive, susceptible variety, that it may only take 10 hours. And so it gives you a chart and it shows you where you're at, many hours you have, and then it kind of gives you a forecast of what to expect. So for commercial growers, it's very helpful for them to know, okay, I'm really good for right now, but it looks like Monday I'm going to be at 40 hours. So I need to get a spray on before Monday.
Okay.
Because on disease control, we look at protecting the plant.
Right.
And so we want to have our protection on before we get to those numbers. Where insects were more reactive, diseases we want to protect before we have an issue. Because once it's there, it's there.
So what it's saying is basically the environmental conditions are right.
Yes.
That if the spores or whatever come in, that disease can take off in your field.
And so you want to have that fungicide protection at the right time.
Okay.
And so some people...
And that really is cut down on unnecessary spraying.
Exactly.
It makes
saves a lot of money.
Your spray more accurate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so if your site is a little bit different from your closest Mesonet site, you can tell that over a time, and you can adjust it a little bit. But it's really beneficial in, like you said, saving unnecessary spraying. When it's really dry and really warm, we may not need to spray at all. And so, it just has to be the right conditions for that scab to take off and go.
And that's on Mesonet's website.
Yep.
And I think it's under maybe their agriculture page.
Yes.
Is that the
There's an
advisories?
agriculture section, and then you select horticulture, and then there's a pecan link that you can click on.
Okay. And they also have the links are in the comments. Thank you for that note. The links are in the comments to those Mesonet sites. And on Mesonet, while we're mentioning that, they also have information and advisories for grape producers as well.
For grape black rot. And so grapes are very sensitive to black rot. It's another fungus, and so it affects the leaves and the fruit as well. And so it can cause spots on the leaves, can cause the leaves to drop off prematurely, and then once it gets on the fruit, it causes the fruit to raisin up, and so you just don't have any production if you don't spray for a lot of these very sensitive varieties. And so a lot of the wine grapes are highly sensitive to black rot, and so they require sprays very regularly, maybe every week or 10 days to control this. So on their advisory, it's the same principle, except you don't select your resistance. You just look at the number of days that are infectious days, kind of, and then it will tell you spray or no spray. So it's very easy. You don't have to look at really much. You just put the last time you sprayed in there, and then it goes from that date forward, and it either has a green spray or red don't spray, so it's very
pretty
easy.
straightforward.
Right.
That's good.
And so that again can save our growers from spraying unnecessarily.
Now, is that something that a homeowner, if they have a few grapevines, that they can spray for?
Yeah, they can look at that as well. And some of our table grapes might have a few issues with black rot. There are some more resistant varieties that I would recommend planting instead of some of the more susceptible types. And we have fact sheets that talk about growing grapes in the home garden. And so it lists some of those varieties, but for table grapes, like Mars is really disease resistant and does really well. But there's many others. And then for wine grapes, our most resistant type would be Cynthiana. And
Say that again?
Cynthiana.
Cynthiana, okay.
Has more of a American parentage in its background, and it's more adapted to Oklahoma conditions. It's cold hardy, it's disease resistant, and it grows pretty vigorously. So it's one of those that if people want to make juice or wine, it does pretty well. Arkansas, Missouri, in Missouri they call it Norton, and in Arkansas they call it Cynthiana, but it's actually the same grape. And that's kind of their state grapes. So they're used pretty widely in this region.
So how is our grape production? I know, it seemed like 15 years ago now that really
the late
ramped
1990s.
up? Okay.
We had maybe 2 wineries in the state.
Uh-huh.
And
It's early 2000s is
yeah,
when it just took
right.
off, it seems
and
like.
we started our grape management course in 2001. And so the first year we had that class, we had about 90 people sign up. And I think we even had to cut it off because our building was super crowded with 90 people. And so that class brought in a lot of people, taught them how to grow grapes, what varieties might work well, but we really didn't know a lot about which varieties to use in the state in the early 2000s because although the turn of the century, not 2000s, but 1900s.
The other century.
Yeah, we had maybe 4,000 or 5,000 acres of grapes in Oklahoma. And then Dust Bowl and Prohibition, those were all killed or removed at that time. So we have been a grape growing state in the past, but the grapes that were being grown were things that were more adapted to our site. A lot of them were juice grapes, but there were wine grapes as well, and a lot of table grapes. And then there was kind of a push back in the 50s or 60s, I think, again, for some table grapes and things. And so Herman Heinrichs was the horticulturist here at OSU, and he did some breeding work trying to find what would work best here. And we have some of those still at the research station. We've found those and kept them. Oh, wow. And so one of them that is particularly of interest is called Rubaiyat.
Okay.
And it's a... Here you go. My French is not very good, but it's a tincture. It's like a tint, a good tint or coloring for wine grapes.
Oh, okay.
And because
they use the skin, right?
The skin is normally what tints wine, but on Rubaiyat and a few other grapes, the whole berry, the juice, the pulp, the skin is all really ruby red.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a good blending grape to make red wines a prettier color. Oh. And so there's some interest in looking at that in the future. Huh. So we've kept that growing there at the research station. So it's kind of interesting. But through, in the early 2000s, we had a big jump in production or acreage. People were planting grapes, and even farmers that had center pivots out in western part of the state, they were wanting to plant the corners where they couldn't plant corn.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
But, sometimes that doesn't work very well. Grapes are not...
They're not an easy crop, are they?
They're not corn or
or
wheat or anything that you just
not to
plant.
Say there is an easy crop,
no,
but yeah.
But they require a lot of labor and a lot of fungicide sprays, and they're and labor to harvest.
A lot of
pruning.
visits, regular visits.
And so, unless you like to be out in the vineyard doing hands-on activities, it's a lot of work. And so, a lot of people planted some acreage at that time when it was really, everyone was excited, and they may have planted the type of wine that they like to drink. So some people planted Chardonnay. Well, we found out that Chardonnay breaks bud super early in the spring. And so, Oklahoma's crazy weather, our fluctuations. It's not that we get so cold or so hot. It's that we're really cold and really hot in the same week.
Right.
And so that's hard on plants, especially grapes. And so Chardonnay would break bud maybe a week and a half ahead of anything else. And they may have a foot or more of growth, and then they get frozen back. Okay. And so they would lose that growth, just keep losing it each year. So the plant didn't die, but it was just continual stresses on that plant. So we figured out Chardonnay is probably not right for Oklahoma. Okay. And then,
dang.
So just because you like to drink something doesn't mean you should grow that. But there are a lot of other options, and you need to really look at the part of the state that you live in. Kind of north of I-40, we want to look at more cold hardiness. Okay. And that's not just for grapes, that's for a lot of other plants. Right. We kind of use that as a dividing line.
Yeah, we really are the center of the country.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also want to look at, east versus west. The eastern part of the state's a lot wetter, and than the West. And so things that are very disease susceptible, you may not want to grow it in the eastern part of the state, but it might do fine in the West. And so, you have to kind of look at your location to pick out what is actually best.
And so, I know, I mean, you could talk about grapes for
Yeah.
a while. And that's the information that they would learn about in this class.
Right.
So you've structured the class a little bit differently since you did it when you first started.
We have specialists come in to talk about soils and pest control and budgets, economics, all different kinds of different topics that are important for someone managing a vineyard. And we start in March when the plants are dormant. That's when we start pruning. So our very first class, we go out into the vineyard and we learn how to prune. Okay. And so then the next month, we see what the topic is that's important to management for that month. So we talk about that. And so we spend time in the vineyard each month, or we try to. This year it rained every single class that we had. And so they hear about it in the classroom and then go out into the vineyard to kind of reinforce and practice some of those techniques.
Yeah, and you're actually following the grape throughout the whole season that way.
So we end in September with grape harvest. So it's pretty neat. And I don't know that there's any other courses like that cover the entire growing season.
Yeah. And so that'll start in March, you said?
Yeah.
So people should register for that now?
They can register online at I think we've got it up now. Yeah. But the course is $250. You get a lot of resources.
I was going to say,
material.
You come out with that with a lot
big notebook and a lot of other great resource books. And then also you get to meet a lot of the people that you need to know.
That's true, yeah.
I think that's probably the best part is you get to know the people that you're going to need later on.
Well, not even the OSU specialists in those particular, like soils and into, but also your fellow growers.
We learn a lot from the people that take the class. And some people take it more than one time. So it's not just for people who have grapes. They may be planning to plant a vineyard. And so if I convince somebody that they're not right, they don't need to plant that because they don't want to spend that much time, I've saved them a lot of money.
Right.
Even if they spent $250 in the first place.
Absolutely.
If they don't plant 5 acres of grapes and then fail, I've saved them a lot of money.
Yeah.
But for those that go on and are successful, then they can, they may take it before they start, and then a couple of years later, they may take the class again because things are different. They have different questions at that time.
Right.
And so something that is important that they didn't understand when they first started.
There's so much. You're not going to retain it all. I've actually taken the class with you. So, I'd probably need a refresher myself as well.
But, we learn something from the other class members all the time. We have people that come in and they have a background in soils or they have a background in equipment or something. And so, they can share and they have someone to, bounce ideas off of. So it's really neat.
And especially not only is it people from all over the state, but sometimes you might find somebody that's right down the road from you.
Sure.
And to have that person to kind of bounce ideas off.
We've had people take the class from almost every county in the state and then also from Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Texas.
It's an excellent resource and program.
It's really pretty neat. We've had it ever since 2001.
Very good.
So.
And going back to pecans.
Right. We do offer a class for pecan growers.
You do the same thing for pecans as well.
Right. And that starts the end of February.
Okay.
And we don't meet in April or June, but we finish that class up in October during pecan harvest.
Okay.
So it's
I love
a great
that
class.
you just follow the crop and kind of get to see all the processes of it.
It's really important. And there's not another pecan class offered that's like this. Most of the time you'll meet for a week and you'll talk about pecan production.
And you know it all, right?
Yeah, and so if you don't see those processes, we go out and we do crop load thinning, and we do plant pecan trees, and we grow seedlings from nuts even. And so at the end of the year, they get to take home a few trees.
And do you do grafting too in that class?
Yeah, that's always a highlight.
Yeah, that's
they always like that. So.
Okay. Well, we want to say hello to Sue Campbell also and Vicki Dobson out there. So thank you for joining us.
Vicki is my aunt in Texas. Hello.
I was going to say, are you related to any of those? So So, and if Becky sounds like she knows a lot, she does. Becky is our specialist that knows so much about, not only, we focus today mainly on pecans and grapes, but you're really our go-to person for brambles, home peach trees, fruit trees, anything like that. And so you've been with us for a while. Tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, I started at the research station at Perkins, working with peaches and apples mostly when I was 16. And so my ag teacher suggested I get a job at the research station because he knew I was looking for something. And so whenever I was hired, the other girls that were working there, they were like, "Oh, she's not going to last a week. She has long fingernails and she's a cheerleader."
I think you've proven them wrong.
I'm kind of stubborn, I guess. I had to prove my point. But I ended up going to OSU. I got my degree in horticulture because I knew about horticulture from doing, working in the at the station through high school, and then I worked all through college at the research station. After I graduated, I moved to Texas for a short stint, and then I started back at OSU in 1988 as a senior agriculturist for the pecan researcher and the extension specialist. And so as a technician, mostly extension the last 10 years or so, and for the last 7 years I've been filling in for the state specialist. And then starting a year ago in October, I was promoted to the associate extension specialist position.
Yeah.
So been there.
Well deserved. You were doing the work, right?
So in February, I think it's 32 years that I've been here.
That's fantastic.
So I've been in the department longer than anyone else now. So I feel like I'm getting really old.
You are the archival of information, right? So
I guess so.
Well, we appreciate everything that you do, and I think to kind of go down memory lane here a little bit.
Okay.
Because we like to do that.
Yeah.
We have a video.
Have an old video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something about a particular type of peach, I believe, that you were talking to Steve Owens about.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Well, Becky, I hear people talk about how they want an Alberta peach. They want to grow those. What's your opinion on that?
Well, Alberta is one of those named peaches. It was one of the first peaches that they recognized the name. And it's a freestone, yellow-fleshed. Really, it was a good quality peach at that time. And now there's a lot of other choices that are better. And they're still available in some markets. Some people have taken selections of Alberta, and those are good choices. But really, any type of freestone that's yellow-fleshed is what people are looking for when they're thinking of Alberta.
Okay, so the actual Alberta is kind of gone by.
Yeah,
and there
it's
are a lot better
ones.
ones.
It's kind of soft and it bruises easily. Is one of the drawbacks of an Alberta.
Okay. Well, Becky, I've also heard about the bend-over peach. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, that's the kind that we like to have out in the orchard. It's when they're fully ripe and you have to bend over to take a bite.
Take a bite. Bend over peach so you don't get your clothes dirty. Okay. Well, these are really tasty and really juicy. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate all the information.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Becky.
I look a little different there, don't I?
Nice haircut. I think the hair is the thing that always changes over the years.
Yeah.
You look exactly
just my
the
hair.
same, though.
It's just my hair's changed,
you
right?
look perfect.
So that was fun, and I know that was on the classics for Oklahoma gardening. I think Kevin got a kick out of that more
I
than
think
anybody.
it's still one of our popular segments that people watch. So
But yeah, bend over peaches, they're the best.
That's the fruit that everybody's looking for in July.
I know.
So.
I won't buy peaches at the grocery store because you just can't get a bend over peach at the grocery store.
Yeah.
You look for them and there's never any listed as bend over.
Peaches are a tricky one for Oklahoma, though,
Yeah,
right?
this year was especially hard on peaches in the state. thought it was going to be great because we didn't have those really cold temperatures. And so I even put Christmas lights around some of my home trees, see if that would help with one day I thought we were going to get cold. And so people are always looking for a way to save those buds when our spring freezes. But it's kind of got past that hurdle. And then we had so much rainfall that a lot of our peach trees dropped the leaves. They turned yellow and then they dropped leaves. And then they also dropped the fruit. They'd shrivel up and they didn't go ahead and develop properly because too much rain. Peaches can't handle having, we call it wet roots, wet feet. They just don't like to have wet root system. And so in my yard, I have red clay. I can grow beef, Bermuda, and bricks in my backyard. And so I have one area that's a little bit higher that I planted a peach tree on. And so it lost some of its interior leaves because it was really wet, but I had one off in another part of my yard that it completely lost every leaf, and I doubt it will survive this year because of the clay soils. If you do have clay soils, things like apples and pears are more adapted to those heavier soils. But everybody wants a peach. And so it's, if you have the right soils, and if you don't, in my case where we have that low spot, I might have my husband build up a berm
You can actually,
and then plant on top of that.
so almost create like a raised bed to grow them in.
Right.
Okay.
And so that'll help.
And those patio peach trees, I mean,
Yeah,
can you
I've
grow?
never had any
Okay.
experience with those,
Okay.
but it would be the same. You wouldn't want to keep them too wet.
Right.
And with peach trees in general, people say, well, they get so big, I have to have a ladder to prune them. You can keep them pruned back to a height that's workable
manageable.
for you. And so if you prune them properly, starting at planting time, and that's important, start at planting time, cut the trunk off, or cut the tree off about knee high, 18 inches to knee high, because we don't want a lot of trunk. We want a lot of branches. And so we don't want a tall trunk. We want a short one. So our fruiting wood's going to be lower to the ground.
Because basically that'll start it branching out from that 18
And you can
inches.
select your scaffold branches to have your fruiting wood closer to the soil or to the ground, where you can reach it. Don't have to have a ladder. Easier to spray, easier to harvest, and everything.
Yeah, and we actually did kind of a whole series over the last 3 years. We've been training a nectarine tree, which is similar.
Sure.
And
It's just
so
a fuzzless peach.
Yeah, and so to show people, year one of planting, a whip, basically, a bare root.
Right. Don't
that we
spend
got.
a lot of money on a big peach tree.
No. Yeah, get a little one. We cut it in half. Like you get this 4-foot tree in the mail, and you're thinking, this is what I got for my money, but then you cut it in half.
They are more adapted if you can start with a smaller tree.
And
as
it's
well.
amazing how well it has grown in the 4 years that it's been there.
Right.
It's a full-size tree that we're getting. I mean, not full-size, but it's a
They
decent
can
size
be.
tree.
They can start production in year 3.
Yeah.
And then full production by year 5. But we're gonna have
Maybe we'll have a bend over peach
Yeah.
nectarine this.
We'll do a updated segment.
Yeah,
for that,
yeah. Well, that's
so.
what we've done. The last 3 years kind of followed the pruning and finding your scaffolds.
Right.
And so that's on our Facebook
It's
page
hard for
or
people to
or
do
YouTube
that
channel.
to make cuts on a tree that you paid money for. Why do you want to cut it back? But it's very beneficial.
So for homeowners, you have something coming up for.
I do. It's a backyard fruit tree planting and pruning field day. And I'm gonna have it on Saturday, which is a little bit different.
Okay.
Normally our field days are during the week, during the work week, but I'm gonna have it on Saturday so we can get more people maybe can attend. It's scheduled for February 15th, which is the time you want to start planting your trees in the spring.
Right.
You can still do fall planting, but spring planting about the middle of February into March is ideal. And then also fruit tree pruning, we want to start about then as well. A lot of people, once they the trees drop their leaves in the fall, they want to start pruning. But that's not good. We want to wait, get through the bulk of the winter, and then do our pruning.
Okay.
If we get freeze damage and we've already pruned, there's nothing to kind of buffer that damage.
Right.
So February, March is a great time to prune.
And you'll cover more than just peaches, I'm guessing. Apples.
We
Some
have
people might not realize you need to plant more than one apple tree.
Right. We're going to talk about variety selection. We're going to talk about how to properly plant the trees, how to prune. We're going to have hands-on so people can actually plant a tree and prune a tree. We've got a little demonstration block at the research station at Perkins, and I have some figs, some cherries, some pears, apples, and peaches. Okay. And so we'll talk about some of all of those, and we'll plant some different types of trees and talk about what works well and what might be a little more difficult. And they can tell that by looking. So some things aren't doing as well as others.
Right. Okay.
But we'll talk a little bit about how to do some pest management, critter control, because the deer and rabbits, they can wreak havoc on your trees, even in town. Yeah, you can have deer coming up and rubbing on them.
I saw one next to Walmart the other day.
I know.
It's like...
So some tricks to keep some of those pests out of there, and then stress weed control. That is the most important part of growing fruit trees or pecans. Weed control is more important than fertilizing or watering.
Oh, okay.
And so we're going to talk a lot about weed control at that field day.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be just spraying. It can be other ways.
Okay. And brambles as well?
Yeah. Well, the field day is going to be based on fruit trees.
Okay. Trees.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so, this one is.
Okay, well, we might need another one for you. We need so much from you, Becky. And we'll have to have you back on again to talk about brambles and some of those other things.
Yeah, I know. I get started talking pecans and grapes, and I can talk for days. So.
Well, no, this has been great. We appreciate you coming on. And
sure.
And I know Terry had a question real quick that we can maybe answer quickly. And it's sort of similar to all of our pruning. He mentions that he has an overgrown and out of shape yew, which is a small shrub, shade shrub, or it could be a large shade shrub. Anyways, he wants to know when to trim it. And how to trim it.
I'll let you handle that one.
Well, I was going to mention it's sort of similar to what you were saying about, pruning your fruit trees. Really, you want to just leave it all winter long. I wouldn't really mess with it at this point. Come into February, as we're going into our warmer months, prune it back pretty hard to get it back into shape. A lot of times they'll kind of die out in the center, so you want to make sure to kind of allow that center to open up and get a little more sunlight to it.
Right.
Even though they are a shade plant, you want still some sunlight in there. And it will flush back out once the spring starts coming on. So it's kind of like a rose or something like that. So a lot of plants, just let them sit in the wintertime so that it has that extra coverage through the cold season, and then prune it back right before it starts growing in the springtime.
Right. On our grapes, I don't like to start pruning until March.
Yeah.
And peaches, you can actually wait till they're flowering in the middle of March.
Okay.
And that's a great time to prune, because you kind of have a little idea of how harsh the winter was.
Well, I was going to say,
you can adjust how much you prune.
Yeah, a lot of times if it's something that's marginal as far as it might have even frozen back, you don't want to prune until you know what actually is dead.
Right,
or alive, because you might be cutting off the alive stuff and then leaving the dead stuff there. So
that's right. So
yeah.
And he was talking about a yew, but overgrown like apples and pears, it's the same thing. You just want to prune them back a little bit at a time on those overgrown fruit trees. Okay. So we kind of use a rule of 30.
A general rule for most plants is 30% or a third or
Yeah. So if you take off too much, then they try to grow sprouts and things and can get out of shape again really quickly. So.
I think the only thing, crepe myrtles, hollies, some of those that you could take them all the way back and they'll be fine. So anyway, well, thank you so much, Becky. And thank you to everyone who listened and joined in on our conversation today. So this wraps up our 2019 season, but we will be back on January 8th. Which is a Wednesday, again at 10 a.m. And during that podcast, we're going to be joined by the local county horticulture educators from, I think, 6 different counties. They're all going to be up here. So we're going to have kind of a quick fire, about 15 minutes with each one of them, and letting us know what they're doing in their particular counties.
Interesting.
So thanks for joining us.
Sure. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And Merry Christmas, first of all. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you.
To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, okpecans.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and the Tulsa Garden Club.